Welcome to tonight's forum about fentanyl trafficking, how prevalent is fentanyl, and what is being done about it. This forum is being recorded to be edited down for future use. I am Sarah Baum, the Audience Development Manager of the Wenatchee World. We are excited to be here with our partners at Pybus Public Market, bringing our community closer to the people and issues that are making news. Tonight's coffee, water, and tea service is provided by Cafe Columbia over there. We also have cookies. Questions were submitted online in advance of this forum. When we get through those submitted questions, if there's time, we'll take questions from you guys in the audience. Now I'm going to turn this over to our journalist, Oscar Rodriguez, who will lead us through this.
Thank you for coming. So I'd like to welcome to the stage our two panelists for tonight, Mr. Wayne Harris, Chelan County Coroner, as well as Sergeant Chris Foreman of Chelan County Sheriff's Office and the Columbia River Drug Task Force. Round of applause, please. And we want to make sure the mic is on. Thank you. So like Sarah said, yeah, we'll be tackling the issue, or some of the issues related to fentanyl in our community, as well as what's being done. So if you guys are ready, just, if you guys, I introduced you, but if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit what you do, the work you do, and especially in relation to addressing the fentanyl issue in our community.
So my name is Chris Foreman. I work for the Chelan County Sheriff's Office. I've been with the Sheriff's Office now for 21 years. I had the opportunity to be the supervisor of the Columbia River Drug Task Force, which is made up of East Wenatchee, Chelan County, and Douglas County Sheriff's Office. So we're essentially a force multiplier team representing all of the agencies in the Wenatchee Valley. And so I was the supervisor there from 2011 to 2018. I was the commander of that task force from 21 into 2022, and then recently was just asked to go back into that position as a supervisor again. So I say all that to just share with you that I've kind of seen the trends of drugs in the Wenatchee Valley and how we've gotten here to fentanyl today in 2024. In addition to that, I'm the president of the Washington State Narcotics Investigators Association. So that's an association that represents basically all narcotics detectives in our state. And so I've had the opportunity to go back to Washington, D.C., talk to our congressmen and women there about what's going on in our local communities. I've flown down to the border in Arizona and seen how the drugs are trafficked up through Mexico. And so all to say is, this is something that I'm passionate about, and recognize that it's a huge problem that we as a community all have to band together to fix.
Thank you everyone for being here and taking time out to learn about this crisis. I'm Wayne Harris. I'm Chelan County Coroner. I've been the coroner for 19 years. Prior to that, I was in the funeral industry. I was a licensed funeral director in Balmer and worked with many families who lost loved ones. I was deputy coroner for a short while when Dr. Fino was the coroner and pathologist. And then when she resigned to move to Olympia to live with her husband, who got a job in Olympia, she would come back here and do autopsies for us. And so I was appointed at that time, and then I've run, I think, 5 elections unopposed. So it's been a very rewarding career for me, and the ability to help people who are grieving. And it's nice to see them years later in the store, happy and maybe remarried, and their life is good. So I appreciate being able to help them there. That's where we are. Oh, and my involvement is obviously the coroner is in charge of, well, technically the coroner is in charge of every death that occurs in the county, but for obvious reasons we don't investigate or go to every scene. Hospice deaths, any death at home, we get a notification of. Certain hospital deaths, like the emergency room, get those death notifications. there are the deaths that we have to go to the scene, traffic fatalities, homicides, suicides, deaths where someone in their home may have been there for quite some time. We can't expect the law enforcement to manipulate a role or look at the body. That's not their job, and we don't want them to do that. So we'll go there and do that and make sure there's nothing on their body that shouldn't be there that may have caused their death. And we'll go to a scene if it's a young person, a person that has no known medical conditions. And lastly, and including all accidental deaths that include drug overdoses or suspicious circumstances. So as you can imagine, we're talking about scenes that are involving overdoses tonight.
Sergeant Foreman, could you maybe clarify a little bit, just give us a little walkthrough of what the Drug Task Force does on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. So our task force is essentially to go out and target drug dealers in our community, and we go wherever the drugs are coming from. So over the years in my career, we've worked cases that have led us to Yakima, to Everett, Snohomish County, Spokane, Okanagan County, and we work with our federal counterparts, both the DEA and the Office of Homeland Security, HSI, and so we use a combination of criminal informants, so people that have been arrested that are working off charges, and they essentially are the ones that are going out and purchasing those drugs on our behalf. And then we're doing our investigations, a combination of surveillance, writing search warrants, putting trackers on cars, writing pen registers to get into phones, and tracking these drug dealers, and ideally trying to figure out where they're getting their supply from, and then working up the chain as high as we can. So I would say the vast majority of our work is using criminal informants, but we also have paid informants. So we have people that are motivated, that recognize they might have a contact or a way to get in, and they want to do it for the benefit of the community because they recognize it's a problem, and they want to just essentially go out and do what they can, and they have either the life experience or just the connections to do that, or we have folks that they make a living doing it, and they kind of bounce around the state or the Northwest and work in different areas. But yeah, our bread and butter is essentially locating or hearing from the community. They might say, hey, we have a house that's a problem, and we'll go out and we'll set up surveillance, and we'll start watching it and seeing people coming and going, looking for short amount of like people showing up for 3 to 5 minutes at a time, all hours of the night. If you think about it, you might have someone over for dinner once a week, or you might have a friend stop by, but when that's happening nonstop throughout the day, that's one of the things we look for drug trafficking. And then we'll essentially try to identify who the people are that are coming to sell the drugs, and then who are the users that are coming to buy the drugs, and then we'll work an investigation up from there. So if you think about the area we cover, we get calls from the community from Rock Island, East Wenatchee, Leavenworth, Chelan, and then we're trying to go out and utilize the detectives that we have to work those cases. And just to give you guys an idea, so there's myself and one other Chelan County detective. Currently there's one Wenatchee police detective, one East Wenatchee police detective, and then one Douglas County detective. We have partnered with Department of Corrections, so we have a Department of Corrections agent that works with us, and then we have Homeland Security. And so on a good day, there's maybe 6 or 7 of us covering that entire area to work those investigations.
Okay. Mr. Harris, I'm wondering if you can maybe touch on fatal overdoses from this year and the previous year a little bit. According to data from the State Department of Health, the number of fatal overdoses in the county has been on the rise since at least 2016. The State Department of Health reported 23 fatal overdoses last year alone in the county. Mr. Harris, can you tell us about how many fatal drug overdoses there were last year alone?
Yes, last year, should say brace yourself, it's gonna be a lot of stats here. Last year, there were 37 total overdoses in Chelan County alone. And I'll elaborate, let me go back here a little bit. So, we really didn't start paying attention to overdose numbers until we started seeing them spiking a little bit. So I only have back to 2019, and in 2019 there were only 4 in Chelan County. In 2020 there were 4, and those were, well, all 4 were fentanyl with other drugs like meth or coke or something like that. 2020 there were 4, and they were all fentanyl except with coke or meth except for 1. 2021 there were 7, so we had a little bump there. They were all fentanyl except for 1 that was oxycodone with some other prescription drugs. And I think maybe that's why we started tracking it, because we noticed fentanyl was now in the valley. Prior to that, we were investigating a lot of opioid deaths, and I can't remember the year that they started cracking down on the opioid crisis, but we noticed that people weren't overdosing on those much anymore. Then heroin took a spike because the opioids were kind of locked down, so heroin spiked, and then heroin went away when fentanyl came around. So that was 19, 20, and 21. In 2022, here's the biggest jump. In 2022, there were 31 overdoses. 20 were fentanyl or fentanyl combined with other drugs. 2 were prescription. 1 was cocaine with prescription. Some were alcohol prescription. 2 were meth. 1 was meth with alcohol, some other psychedelics. And I don't recall how many, if any, were suicides, but once in a while we'll get a suicide by prescription drugs, so we do count that as an overdose, but I don't really focus too much on that because it's not the crisis that we're dealing with right now. Not the suicide's not a crisis, but the overdose of those type of medications. 2023, we went down a little. We had 21. Again, 8 were fentanyl, 11 were fentanyl with meth, and 2 were prescription. So you see where fentanyl is here and it hasn't gone away. And 2024, 37, 8 were fentanyl, 23 were fentanyl with methamphetamine, 4 were just methamphetamine, 1 was an opiate, and 1 was cocaine. Now the opiate is interesting because, and I should point out that of the 37 we had this year, we went to 32 scenes, so we went to where the death occurred. There were 5 out of the 37 that died in the hospital. So what happened is they were found unresponsive either in Wenatchee or I think 1 was Douglas County or Okanagan County. They're unresponsive, they're able to be brought back or at least be sustained. They're brought to the hospital here, and they often die in the emergency room. Once in a while, they'll be able to be on life support, and they'll be in the hospital for a while until the family decides they want to make that individual an organ donor. So 32 though is still a lot to go to, a lot of scenes to go to. Should I keep going? I've got some more.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
As long as I'm on a roll here, you'll be interested in this information. So this is this year now. We're 2024. These are the statistics for 2024. The average age was 43, and I broke it down. 1 was 18 years old. 4 were in their 20s. 10 were in their 30s. 11 were in their 40s. 6 were in their 50s, and 5 were in their 60s. Now I'm in my 60s. What's a 60-year-old doing drugs for still? But it's addicting, I understand. Here's the racial breakdown. 22 were Caucasian, 7 were Hispanic, 3 were African American, 2 were Hispanic and Caucasian, mixed race, 2 were Native Americans, and 1 was a Native American Caucasian mixed race. Of all the deaths, the 37 we had, we classified them as accident. And so there's 5 manners of death: homicide, suicide, natural, accident, and undetermined. And undetermined potentially could be somebody that committed suicide, or we thought they committed suicide, and we had evidence that they probably committed suicide, but we aren't 100%, so we can put unknown, meaning it could have been an accident. And for us to rule these accidents, we have not found anything in these lives to indicate they wanted to die as they were doing the drugs. There were no notes, there were no prior suicide attempts. So these are generally ruled accident just because we don't have any indication they wanted to die. The 37 this year, 14 were homeless or in transitional housing. And when I say transitional housing, that includes the safe parks and the pods that they have now, or the Bruce Hotel or the YWCA or any of these assisted type housing. 9 were actually homeless that died out on the streets, and 5 were in the transitional housing. So that kind of gives you an idea of, and I didn't think to do, but I should have done male, female.
Speaking on the sort of demographics, I guess, of the fatal overdoses, in your experience over the last nearly 20 years or so as a coroner, do these trends match with previous experience reporting on overdoses, or is this sort of new trends that you're noticing?
They're new. They're new in as much as we never had homeless overdoses.
Oh, really?
Yeah, everyone in the past that has overdosed generally were probably addicted to opioids. They all had houses, lived with families, lived alone, had roommates, whatever the case is. And I didn't look back in 23 or 22 to see, but I don't recall that there being that many of the homeless that have overdosed and died, which is kind of unfortunate, because we know that's part of the reason they're homeless, because they can't cope, or they refuse to cope. Another interesting, did that clear it up? Or?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Sergeant Foreman, if you have anything to add.
So I think one thing that's important to share is, like, the overdose is part of the picture, it's not the whole picture. So a lot of overdose deaths that we would be having, that would be probably doubling this number, is intervention with Narcan. So law enforcement carries Narcan. The jail actually has it now in the tanks. And I was at a meeting today with Chris Sharp, who's the director of our jail. I think they had 21 saves in the jail alone from Narcan, where fentanyl had made its way into the jail. People had overdosed, and either jail staff or sometimes the inmates, because they have access to it, are the intervention that's saving these people that would otherwise be overdosing. So, and to paint a picture of the kind of just the prevalence of how often overdose is happening and how it's very hard to track is, we have the end result when they call 911, aid goes, a lot of times law enforcement's going, but that call might come out as a cardiac. And so law enforcement's not going initially, but more information will come, and then dispatch will put it out. And then sometimes it gets recategorized to an overdose, but sometimes it doesn't. It just stays in that cardiac. So there's different things that are just factors that make it hard to track it accurately. But all to say is, Narcan, there's 3 different, I think, vending machines in the Wenatchee Valley where you can go get it for free. And when we make arrests with people that have fentanyl users, the vast majority of them carry Narcan, and then when I'm having conversations with them, I'll ask them, hey, have you been Narcaned, or have you had to Narcan someone? And I would say 80 to 90% of the people have either been Narcaned by someone else or they've Narcaned their friend. So without that, our numbers would be way higher on how many overdose deaths we're having in the Wenatchee Valley. So it's just, again, to kind of paint the bigger picture of this is a huge problem.
Okay.
Can I add on to
Yeah,
that?
absolutely.
Years ago, we were told when we would investigate a death, there's certain things that information we have to gather. And there's a state surveillance overdose report now that we have to provide statistics and information. One of the questions, were they Narcan? And a few years ago, usually they Narcan once or twice, a couple doses and they come back. Now it's usually 4 to 5. And I think one of our cases, the answer was 7 times. So the question is the drug stronger, or are they getting immune or building up an immunity to the Narcan? That's just an issue too. One of the questions also we have to answer is, did they have any mental illness? And most of the time, they in the list of mental illness that they ask about, anxiety, PTSD, bipolar, schizophrenia, and usually the answer is at least one of those. So I don't know if there's some medicating to try to overcome those issues, or if the drugs that they've used throughout their life has caused those mental health issues.
Sergeant Foreman, moving on to the law enforcement piece a little bit more. Can you tell us why fentanyl is such a prevalent drug sold and used out on the street, for example? Why the shift, I guess, over time?
Sure. So this might, be information that you already know, but just to kind of give, again, going back in time. So we had the oxycodone epidemic, which essentially hit our valley in 2009, 2010, and that was, Oxycontin was, prescribed by doctors. Doctors were given information that it was not addictive. That was the data that came from the big pharmaceutical companies of, hey, this is a pain med that'll solve all your patients' problems and it's not addictive. Well, what happened was, people did get addicted to it, and had numerous arrests or informants that I came in contact with that started out with a broken wrist with a motorcycle accident. Their Oxycontin prescription ran out, and their body was physically addicted. And I think it's important to talk about when I'm saying physically addicted is, when I talk to addicts and they talk about coming off of these drugs, and especially fentanyl now has just made it that much worse. But imagine the sickest you've been with, diarrhea, fever, puking, and that's what your body goes through once you're addicted and your body's not getting that opiate. And so we're talking about Oxycontin at this point, but Oxycontin, heroin, and now fentanyl are all opiates, and our fentanyl is our synthetic opiate. So that addict is experiencing that once their body's addicted, and now every decision that they're making in their entire life, whether if they're going to steal, if they're going to try to go out and panhandle money, if they're going to sell their body to get that money or get that item that they can trade for money or give to their drug dealer in exchange for drugs, is to keep them from getting sick. And so obviously, they're very motivated not to start going down that road of withdrawals. And so, we would arrest people, and they would be, I'll do anything to not go to jail, because if I go to jail, then I'm not gonna have access to my drugs, and I'm gonna start going through the withdrawals. And when you talk to Chris Sharp again with fentanyl, fast forwarding to where we are in the last few years, I would say the period of them coming off the drugs when it was heroin or Oxycontin was like 2 to 3 days. Now with fentanyl, it's 7 to 10 days of them being sick and going through the withdrawals that I was sharing with you guys. So when we're looking at that, you know, we're recognizing that, you know, people will, you know, they'll steal from their families. They'll, you know, they're doing things that you and I would never think we would ever do. But that's how much power and, you know, the level of grip this drug has on people. And so, you know, they're a slave to it. They can't get away from it, and they, you know, they're worried about what will happen if they don't have access to that drug. And that's how, you know, people are smuggling drugs into their orifices in their body, and that's how it's getting into jail. Well, imagine like you wanting to take something that was in someone else's body and now putting it in your own body. But that's the level of, you know, addiction that people are at when it comes to fentanyl. So just trying to paint the picture so you can kind of understand the complexity of the problem when we're dealing with trying to get somebody help, and they know to get clean, that's what they're facing to get out of that cycle. And so it's very challenging.
Mr. Harris, anything to add?
Yes, I've talked to several ER doctors here and in other areas, and they agree that they don't want to go to jail because they have to detox, and they don't want that. And so that's part of the reason they get up and leave. Once they get Narcan back, they just don't want to go through that detox. So it's,
Well, yeah, so and kind of just to go through again the how we got here with fentanyl. So we had Oxycontin, and we switched to heroin because Oxycontin got regulated by the DEA. It wasn't available. Heroin essentially replicates the same high, everything the same, and so that's where the cartels recognized, hey, we have a opportunity here to provide this to the people that want it, the whole demand and supply. So the heroin enters the scene, and then essentially fentanyl comes in because we have so many addicts now that are addicted. As the more you use, the more your body builds up a tolerance. So when we talk about lethal doses of drugs, it can be deceiving. And so I'll go into that a little bit too, in that when fentanyl pills are sent off to the DEA lab and they run those pills, you know, through for how much fentanyl is in each pill, they consider a lethal dose. 6 out of every 10 pills that are there are a lethal dose. So that's a lethal dose for, I would imagine, everyone in this room who's not using fentanyl. If someone's using fentanyl, their tolerance is a lot higher. And so going back to the heroin versus fentanyl, you have all these addicts and they're still wanting to get high. And so they're looking for the most, you know, powerful drug that they can get to still get that high. So this is another thing that's very hard to understand if you're not an addict and you're not currently fighting this. But like, we'll get information from informants that a batch has come into town and people have started to get Narcan. And if you and I think about that, we'd be like, well, there's no way I would ever do that. Well, the drug addicts are seeking that out because that means it's really good stuff, and they're willing to literally risk their life and give that a chance to get that high from this stuff that is, you know, could kill them or most likely will kill them. So it's hard to wrap your mind around, but that's how we've essentially gotten to fentanyl. And part of the overdose that we hear a lot about is someone will go into jail, they'll serve, you know, 20, 30 days, and they've gone through the withdrawals, they've gone through that process, and then they come out and they get tempted or someone offers it to them, and they go and use the same amount that they did previously before they went into jail, and now their body's tolerance has dropped, and then they overdose. And so we've had quite a few of those where they had been clean for a certain amount of time, and unfortunately relapsed, got tempted, or it was offered to them, and then ended up being that Wayne's showing up to their residence.
and I will also tell you, I've had many families that I've interacted with at the scenes, and they say that the person never used fentanyl as far as they knew. They were just using meth. Well, fentanyl is inexpensive to make, and so they're adding it as a filler into meth and other drugs. So even though an individual thinks they're just doing meth, they're not, and that's sometimes why we see fentanyl meth combination.
Sergeant Foreman, could you tell us a little bit about the quantity of fentanyl that's being distributed here in the broader Wenatchee Valley community? Is that trending upward, the amount, or trending downward, or is there any way of knowing how much there is out there?
Yeah, so really what we've had a shift since last year. So when the cartels started making fentanyl, they had pill mills, and they were pressing the fentanyl into pills, and on the street they're called blues. There's a bunch of different names for them, but it's essentially replicating a Percocet 30 milligrams, so a Perc 30. And so when we first started seeing fentanyl come into the scene, it was pills. It was all pills, and at first it was $4 to $5 a pill when it first entered. Now pills are essentially, depending on your quantity, 25 to 50 cents per pill. And I mean, I've talked to addicts, not that, people do lie to the police, but I feel like for the most part, when they come and they're talking to me, they're honest. And I've had people that have told me they do 20 to 30 pills a day. And so that's the level they're at with their fentanyl use. So with that being said, with the pills coming in, and the amount of addicts that we have in the United States of America, the demand now is for just straight fentanyl powder, because the addicts are like, well, if it's just powder, then I can essentially regulate how much I'm using, and I'm essentially just getting the powder. There's no binder or any other ingredients, and so now our pills are dropping and the powder is going up. So it's not necessarily, it's hard to quantify, like, okay, well, pills are down, so that's good, but knowing that it's just like heroin went away, pills showed up, now pills are going away, and fentanyl powder is going up. And then the next trend they're talking about is carfentanil, which is even more potent than fentanyl. So that's, I guess, is that helpful?
Yeah, I think
what
so.
you're looking for?
Mr. Harris, anything to add?
Sure. So there's a drug called xylene, or that you've heard about it. It's back east mostly, but lately we've had some overdoses where the law enforcement will send to the crime lab the residual, whatever the product they have, and we just got a report the other day that was in somebody's system. So it is moving across the country, and it is here. It's interesting, I don't know if you can see this very well, but this surveillance report that I get, the hotbed is over, obviously, King County in that area. A little bit down in Pierce County, Spokane a little bit, but it's, we've got the coloring there, so we're on the map. Yakima, of course. So just another stat I didn't have or didn't tell you about. 27 of the overdoses were in the city limits. 10 were in the county.
That's for last year?
For last year, yeah. And obviously part of it is the homeless. If they overdose in another county and die at the hospital, that's considered the city. So that might be slightly skewed, but and I just checked, 37 of the overdoses, 31 were male and 6 were female. And that seems to be consistent, that males are usually overdosing at a greater rate.
Okay. And then back to Sergeant Foreman on the enforcement side of things. Do you feel the task force has made any inroads or made a dent in curbing the distribution of the fentanyl into the area, at least in recent years, or do you feel any hope in being able to do that in the future?
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, obviously, I'm a part of this community. I have kids. My son's here tonight. I want to. One of my passions is going into the schools and talking to kids early about the dangers of drugs, and especially fentanyl, because, like Coroner Harris mentioned, like a lot of the other drugs, cocaine and meth, the cartels are lacing those drugs with fentanyl. So, famous case, Tom Petty's overdose that killed him. He was a cocaine user, but the cocaine that he got was laced with fentanyl, and that's what ultimately killed him. So that the cartels again have recognized, you know, this stuff is so potent and so addictive that if we get it on all the drugs, if I'm a meth user and all of a sudden I either want to quit or get meth from somebody else, and I'm going through withdrawals and sick, and I think, oh, that must just be bad meth, so I'm gonna go back to the guy that I had that meth with, and okay, everything's all good. So that there is, you know, there's a lot of, you know, complexities when you're looking at, hey, how are we making a difference in our community? But I think us continuing to work with the community, the people we serve, which is you guys, getting it out of our neighborhoods, and we recognize if we take one house down, then there's going to be another one pop up. But if we're continually pressing, and then we're working hand in hand with our prosecutors and the judicial system for accountability, I think it is something that we are, we've seen success. We've worked with our federal counterparts to get, especially, we get to the quantities that meet the federal guidelines, and we can send people away to jail for longer. I think some of the stuff that we're working with at the legislators is trying to make harsher penalties for especially fentanyl distribution, or making the law more stringent for overdose homicide. That's one of the challenges that we're looking for, because it can be hard to prosecute some of these cases, and we get that. We do the best we can. We make our investigation. Sometimes it's not enough that the prosecutors can file, but for the families, if it's a case that we want to present that in a way that drug dealers know that, hey, if you're, I refer to it as poison. If you're dealing this poison out in our community and you kill somebody, like, there's going to be consequences. And so, but again, that takes everybody at different levels to be on the same page.
But just to contextualize things, and having seen some of the stats, it seems like things are getting worse before they get better.
Yeah, I think the big thing for our state is we had the Blake decision, and we could have fixed it and put knowingly into the law, and instead we decided, hey, it'd be a great idea to make drugs legal, and we saw what that did, and obviously it got voted back, and now it's at least a gross misdemeanor for simple possession. But I think the community and the public is speaking out more and more, and I think when I go into schools and I ask kids, hey, do you know anyone, whether it's a friend or a loved one or a family member, that's been affected by drugs, specifically fentanyl, I get more than half the kids in the room raising their hands. So it's like, this is affecting everybody, and it ultimately comes down to people willing to get involved and get the word out, like, hey, we need to do some different things. And I think it's important to say, like, I believe in treatment, I believe in education, and I believe in enforcement, and I feel like you have to have all three. But our state is very heavily focused on the treatment side. The enforcement side, up until this last year, there wasn't a single state dollar that was designated for drug law enforcement in our state. So it's up to each individual's chief and sheriff to say, hey, I'm gonna put a person into a drug task force, and I'm going to pay their salary and pay for the equipment and pay all the training. We had some federal funding that we get, and that got reallocated and diverted to other programs this last year. And essentially, we got a 1-year Band-Aid from the state legislature to fix that funding. And now we're currently trying to fight to make sure we get actual sustained and additional funding for our task forces. And a little bit about that, there's 16 drug task forces in our state. There used to be 18, 2 of them have disbanded because of the funding going away. And obviously in the middle of an epidemic, we believe that, we have to have enforcement and the technology and the equipment and the training to go after these drug dealers. And at the same time, we don't really have any unified education program for our kids for hopefully getting in front of the problem before they're tempted or don't have the education to know that this is something that they need to be aware of. And at the treatment level, again, all for treatment, I've literally worked with thousands of drug addicts in my career. And I ask them when I hear they have been clean or gotten out of the, the life, what it took. And it's either literally hitting rock bottom and they have nowhere else to turn, or they essentially have that time out in jail where they're able to get sober, kind of get, out of the fog, recognize their kids have been taken away, and all these terrible things have happened, and they take that first step to getting into treatment. And it's just, it's very hard, the adage of you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And a lot of times, I have parents calling me, they want me to just go out and arrest their son or daughter, because at least they'll know they're in a safe place in jail versus out on the street. And so it is very challenging, but I think it's, we have the Navigator program here, Cafe, and I think, everyone's trying to give these people the opportunity, but at the end of the day, they have to want to change and better themselves, and that can be very hard to do when you're just stuck in that cycle.
Mr. Harris, anything to add?
Yes, I really want to give a kudos to the Drug Task Force. A year ago, there were several notable drug busts that were reported on where thousands of those pills were taken off the street, and we did see a dip in our overdoses. So it is making a difference, even though sometimes it doesn't seem like it. Also, I was reminded that this will give you an idea of how strong fentanyl is. One of the metrics they ask for is there paraphernalia in their hand when they were found? And probably in maybe 10% of the overdoses, they're still holding a lighter in their hand that they're using to eat. So that's how quick it can get them.
I'll ask one last question before we move on to the audience. Mr. Harris, you've given us some information about the sort of individuals most likely, it seems, to overdose. You mentioned, they were transitional housing, or perhaps they were homeless. What can the task force, what can the community do more to prevent what seems like a marginalized group, or a group more at risk of fatally overdosing on fentanyl? How do we go about preventing some of that from happening, given the fact that the numbers are spiking, especially very high?
I wish I could give you that answer. I just don't know. Education is the health department's doing a good job of trying to educate. They go out in areas where these folks are and try to educate them. The only thing I can think of is some type of, you can't force them, but I'm thinking of some type of forced rehab. And I know we don't have any of those facilities around here. But the problem too is they'll go to rehab and then they'll get out and go back to their old friends. They have to try to start a new life, and that's difficult to do. So I wish there were an answer.
Sure, yeah. Sorry, Foreman.
One of the programs that I did see success and was able to follow up over the time that when I was in the task force from 2011 to 2018 was drug court, and that was the program that I saw where essentially it was a deferral. Instead of getting convicted of a felony, you were put in a program, and as long as you completed that program, that felony went away. Being that drugs now are a gross misdemeanor for simple possession, and again, I'm getting some of this information from talking to people that have that option, or and chose not to do it, or people that are just it's the hammer's not big enough to keep them accountable to want to go into that program now. But I do think that that's a good option for some people, and I hope that it continues to go. But before the Blake decision, that was where I was seeing the most change of people being able to get out of this lifestyle and make essentially a 180 and go in a different direction. I think one of the challenges, again, when I talk to people out there that have relapsed, or I heard was clean and then they get back into it, is all of their friends or their support system, they're still in it, and so they get back around those people. The temptation's always there, and it just takes one time, and then they're back in. So the success stories that I've had is, you know, folks that are going into faith-based halfway housing or some kind of treatment that's out of the immediate area. So they're you know, they don't have that resource. Like one of the things that, you know, is just the reality is, you know, people go into Narcotics Anonymous or, you know, treatment and or Narcotics Anonymous or some kind of program like that, and essentially instead of, you know, keeping them clean and sober, it's a networking for finding other people that they can use drugs with. And so it's just, it's, you know, it's very complex.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's time for audience questions, so if you please, when you have the microphone, just please ask your question.
So you talked about overdoses, but even if we had 0 overdoses, we'd still have a huge problem. Do you have a sense for how many addicts, people using fentanyl, you know, compared to the 37 deaths? Thousands, hundreds?
Well, I mean, again, this is me talking to people, and again, I haven't gone out and pulled everyone, but I would say the vast majority of the homeless that you see walking around the Wenatchee Valley are addicted to drugs, or their drug use has significantly contributed to their psychosis or paranoia, or, you know, people you see talking to themselves that are walking down the road yelling at cars and that kind of thing. There's a book out, the author's name is Sam Kionis, and he wrote a book called The Least of Us, and the whole synopsis of his book is long-term methamphetamine use and the chemicals that the cartels are using in that drug specifically is causing psychosis and schizophrenia, and so essentially that drug long-term use is frying people's brains, and then those are the people, because they can't function in society, that are unfortunately out there on the streets. Another documentary, Seattle is Dying, talking about the homeless problem in Seattle. Vast majority of people there, you know, they're saying 98% of them are on drugs, they're addicted to something, and then that's led them to that path.
On that note, I was at a training a while back with King County medical examiners and their investigators. They had 1,500 overdose deaths last year, in 2023, from fentanyl and other sort of 1,500. So, and I don't know if they autopsy all of them, but part of the issue for our county, not that this is germane to the discussion, but we're having a hard time getting autopsies. There are no longer traveling pathologists that come here. So we were taking bodies to these medical examiners facilities. Well, they were all so busy with their own cases, they shut us down. So it's a problem everywhere.
Yeah, one other thing that I mean, you know, I'm in this line of work and I found that shocking was the jail essentially does a urinalysis test on everyone that comes into the jail. Right now, 70% of the people that are booked in the Chelan County Jail have fentanyl in their system. Now, some of them don't realize it because they say they're a meth user or whatever, but again, it goes back to showing that fentanyl is in those other drugs that they think they're using some, but that fentanyl is in there. So think about that, and then, you know, when we look at the crime that we have in our community, and, you know, we have burglaries, vehicle prowls, retail theft, the vast majority of those suspects, you know, those people that are out there committing those crimes, those are our drug addicts. Then they're going out committing those crimes to trade that product or whatever they stole, or give it to their drug dealer and barter for drugs. So a lot of times when we hit a drug dealer's house, they'll have a ton of stolen property, and it's because people have brought them all that stuff instead of money for drugs. So it's again, like, trying to quantify percentages, but the vast majority of those crimes that affect us, our cars being broken into, our houses being broken into, businesses we own where we're getting things stolen from, are those addicts that are doing those crimes.
Hi, I'm Catherine. I'm a public defender in Douglas County District Court, and this has all been super interesting information, and I want to thank the world for bringing this to the community, because I think it's important. I also think it's important to, make sure we have a full picture. In 2024, I had one controlled substance gross misdemeanor, and it was illegal the whole time to control substance, or to have controlled substances. So the majority of the cases that I saw were driving with a suspended license in the 3rd degree, which is when someone is driving with a suspended license and they can reinstate their license, they just didn't. So if the issue is lack of funding for the drug task force, why are officers arresting people for low-level misdemeanors like driving with a suspended license? And why isn't funding that officer's time being diverted to the drug task force if funding is such an issue?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to me it's apples and oranges. People are out on patrol. Patrol is the primary function of law enforcement, is to be out on the road, and part of that is enforcing traffic laws, and so they're pulling people over and they're getting, caught for suspended licenses. All of the crimes that the drug task force does, I would say 99% is all felony level. It's all distribution or intent to deliver. It's not simple possession. Now, I'll tell you from also working patrol, when we got simple possession back, a lot of cops don't even want to deal with it. They don't want to charge someone with a gross misdemeanor. It's not even worth their time because they're not going to get anything in the judicial system as far as time. So it's just a matter of like, well, I can send this off to the lab and get it tested. But I'm not saying I'm one of those people, but I definitely saw from our valley and statewide a big change in law enforcement's, priority on charging that anymore, just knowing that it's a gross misdemeanor. And suspended's easy because they're behind the car, they're behind the vehicle. When we pull them over, they're driving the vehicle. And so, I don't want to say cops are lazy, but I mean, that's the easier crime to charge when you're looking at it. And I'm not saying I agree with it. I've seen that sentiment since it's come back as a gross misdemeanor, that cops are like, yeah, it's not worth my time to write the ticket.
My opinion, I don't like going to scenes where it could have been avoided. There was an accident the other day on the avenue where they found a tutor straw in his hand while he's driving down the road. So that could have been somebody's life he could have taken, if not his own. So I have pretty strong feelings about it.
How you guys doing? My name's Joseph Hunter. Probably got emails from me to both of you guys in the past, but just want to thank you for the information. It was really helpful. I work for a nonprofit, and we do a lot of work around recovery and overdoses. We're the ones who implemented the original vending machine projects in our 4 counties. And me personally, I have 8 years free from fentanyl and heroin. I was one of them in early 2000s who got prescribed pills and went through the whole transition and found recovery in 2016. And I found recovery because my community held me accountable, and I was arrested for simple possession and then thrown into a forced detox in the jail. Very miserable time. I spent 2 weeks detoxing, but that's where my recovery was able to start, because when I came to out of that, just like you had said, I missed my kids, I missed my family, started looking at myself like, what happened, how did we get here? And I think that's a missing link. I think the jail system, the ER beds are one of the most easiest ways to get people into recovery, because most of the time they're in a very vulnerable place, they're alone, they're going through detox, and I think we should focus more of our energy there than trying to do outreach on the streets, because I can tell you from experience, when I was under the influence of either fentanyl or heroin, there was not a chance anybody could convince me, not even my own kids or family, to step into recovery and put the drugs down, because exactly what you said, the fear of withdrawal. And so, and my question is for you, Mr. Foreman. At what point is somebody considered distributing fentanyl pills versus simple, this is my daily supply? Because I hear a lot of that happening where people are getting away from getting a distribution charge because they're saying this is my personal use. And I can tell you from personal experience is that every fentanyl user is a petty dealer on some level. Like, that's the easiest way to get your supply for the day is if someone calls you, hey man, I need some, I got $100, I'm gonna make my cut out of that. And so I'm curious if there's like a limit of the amount of pills, the amount of fentanyl before it's considered, because I got many distribution charges and it was because I had more than personal use. And I could have said it was personal use, but they would call me on that. I'm just curious if there's like a number.
The short answer is there's not a specific number. That's the short answer. I would say it's, in my experience, dependent on the prosecutor and how aggressive they want to be. And then the totality of the circumstances, right? Like, do they have packaging material? Do they have scales? Is it individually weighed out? I mean, and that's some of the stuff we do in our interviews of like, hey, what is, you know, how many pills do you normally use? Well, I use 10 a day. Okay, well, if they have, 20 or 30 pills, for them, that's a 3-day supply. Now, at the same token, yes, the vast majority of, when we start at the low level and start working our way up, I would say the first 3 or 4 tiers are all users. They're all using and selling to promote their habit and keep their habit going, and it's how they survive. And then eventually we get to the people that are in it for the money, and they're the ones that we're ultimately able to, when we take them out, that's a significant impact in the community of how far that trickles down, looking at it from a triangle, or a pyramid. But yeah, I mean, I think just over the years with us working with different prosecutors, when they say, okay, yeah, we'll charge with possession with intent versus simple possession, they're looking at the entirety of the case and the investigation and specifically what we have to make that determination. But it's not a simple of, hey, they have 35 pills, okay, that's, if they have 36, that's distribution. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Kristen. Thank you for all of the information you shared tonight. I was just wondering if there are any community programs that are teaching us, the community members, about how to use Narcan. I didn't know we had the vending machine, so that's amazing, but if I were to come across someone on the street and they need that now, is there a way for me to help them or some way for me to learn?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know of a specific program, but if you look up Narcan and you look at what is distributed, it's a nasal, like a Flonase. The great thing about Narcan is if you think someone's overdosing and it's not on fentanyl and you give them Narcan, it has no adverse effects. So you can't give it to someone, like if I took it right now, nothing would happen to me. So in that way, it's very safe, but it's just, you're literally putting it up into their nose and breaking the bile that institutes it into your nasal passage. So it's very simple, but I believe if you went online, you could find that information. But to answer your question, I'm not aware of a program that's specifically training the public on it.
Can I just, one quick thing? You probably know more than me, but what it does is it detaches the drug from the receptors of the brain. That's why it's so quick to react. And then this gentleman here made a comment that reminded me of something. The fentanyl used to be the pills, like, sorry, Foreman was saying, now we're seeing 99% is powder. So. Comment, I got it.
Just real quick, my name's Garth, I'm with Chelan Douglas Health District. We do offer layperson naloxone administration trainings. I have 4 different trainers on my team. We do it for free for organizations, for businesses as well. Really anyone interested in the community who is concerned about how to use naloxone, how to use it safely. You can go to our website and we have a little form you can fill out with your email address and we'll get in touch with you. Also afterwards, grab me, I'm happy to give you my card, we'll get you connected. More than happy to come out, the training is free around your schedule. And then right now, in the valley, there are 2 machines. We have one at Chelan Douglas Health District building, but there's one at the Alano Club, and that has really, what are the hours? 10 to 10, 7 days a week. So that's on this side of the river.
It's open to the public, it's completely free, no one talks to you, you just walk in, grab it, and leave.
I saw
It's
one.
a really low barrier.
Planned Parenthood has one now.
Planned Parenthood has one outdoors.
Outside.
I believe that's 24/7 access as well.
We'll make sure that all of that information is included in the article as well, so pick up a copy. That'll be there.
Sorry, Sunshine.
That's okay. Hi, I'm Sunshine. And from a law enforcement perspective, what is the priority? Is it helping the people who are in addiction, or is it making arrests? Because while there is overlap, and it's definitely a Venn diagram, I'm wondering what the priority is. Because which one of those is the priority is gonna dictate, well, not only money, but also who's affected and how they're affected.
And let me ask a clarifying question. Are you talking about specifically us at the Drug Task Force or law enforcement in general making arrests on drugs?
Foreman, I'm gonna ask you to speak for law enforcement in general to the best of your ability.
Okay. So I think it's hard because I think about my entire career, and I would say when I first came into this, I was all about putting people in jail and making the arrests. But I would say as I've seen and gotten to know people that are in the back of my car when I'm driving them to the jail, and I start hearing their story and getting to know them, at the end of the day, I want to see them get out of life, and I want to do whatever I can to help that. And and again, like I would say, I was trained, or that's something that is taught at the academy, as far as like we're just people committed crime, we're gonna arrest them and then let the judicial system move on from there. Not saying that's right, I'm just saying that's kind of the way I was trained, and the mentality that was given to me. But the more and longer I've been in this job and heard the stories, I would say in the latter half of my career, I try to hear people's story, find out, hey, what would it take for you to get out of this, and push any resources I can towards them. But again, this is my experience. You talk to Director Sharp at the jail, people that are in there for short amounts of time, until they get that prolonged time and they sober up and then they're willing to take that help, I'm just not seeing that they're wanting it. But again, that's been my experience. But I think, to go back to the question overarching of law enforcement, I think we have been trained that, hey, we're just taking someone to jail that committed a crime, and we're making our case, and then we're moving on to the next thing.
So you've met with many, many people who are drug addicted. Is there anything you think that would prevent that population from going there in the first place? More mental health resources, more community resources? Is there anything that you see that to kind of look at, you can like try to stop the problem and arrest the distributors, but what can we do to prevent that population, to enable them not to go down that path?
Well, I think the education piece, and again, I alluded to it earlier, in the state, we don't have when I was growing up, we had the DARE program, and I'm not saying the DARE program was the end-all be-all. I mean, it prevented me from wanting to use drugs, and I didn't use drugs in my life based on that program. But certain people think that it didn't work, it wasn't successful. Now that's debatable if it was or it wasn't. But again, worked for me personally. We don't have anything like that currently in the schools. It's up to individual schools like Kashmir. Every year I go in and I talk to their freshman health class and I talk about the dangers of drugs. I bring in one of the people that I arrested when I was in the drug task force that's now clean and sober 4 years, and she tells her story of going down that road. And she was somebody that started with marijuana and thought she was going out and buying dabs, and lo and behold, her drug dealer sold her heroin instead of dabs, and then that she got addicted. So I think for our youth, especially, educating in the schools early before they're tempted or it's in front of them and they don't know any better to not try it. If you go there's a social media website called Every 11 Minutes. It's on Instagram. I don't know if it's on Facebook, but every 11 minutes is the average in our country that someone's overdosing on fentanyl. And there are countless stories of young people who thought they were buying a Adderall for studying or a Percocet, and they took one pill and their parents kissed them goodnight, and their parents woke up in the morning, went to get them up for school, and they were dead. And so I think there is a certain portion of our population in our community that we, if we banded together and everyone got on the same page, we could start with our youth and our young people and work on that. And then I think it's also getting, one of the frustrations I have is not knowing what resources are out there or even available for me as law enforcement. Like I want to present people with options so they don't feel like they're hopeless, but a lot of times we don't even know what's available. And so it's getting, again, the community, everybody on the same page of, hey, these are the resources that are out there. These are the people that we can connect you with, that can come meet with you in the jail and meet with you as soon as you're released, and they can walk you to, getting you out of town or, to the clean and sober living. So I think that, that again, it's that communication piece and getting all the entities in the same room, recognizing, okay, what do we have to offer to prevent this from continuing to go the way it is.
Mr. Harris, anything to add before we close it up?
Yeah, I was gonna say that as I think of these individuals that we've taken care of, and listening to their families and having an opinion that none of them are bad people. The stories that I hear, they're wonderful people, they're intelligent, they're educated, they got caught up in the drug scene, they couldn't get out of it. That, like Sergeant Foreman said, that's why they made the decisions they made, but they're not bad people. And as I look at the individual, I don't see names here, but as I look at the list, they were all long-time drug users. There wasn't a single one that one day decided, I'll try something and overdose. They're all long-time drug users, which is part of the reason we start while they're young in school to try to educate. One of the things that I have to deal with is notifying next of kin. Many times I don't know who the next of kin is on this individual, so I will go to the jail administration and say, because most of them have been incarcerated, do you have an emergency contact for this individual? And generally they do, sometimes they don't, but it's a long time addiction, a long time incarceration for these people, and I can't even imagine what they have to struggle with. So, and I've had many families that say they knew the day was coming, and they weren't surprised, and they feel guilty saying it's a relief to know that they'll go years with not knowing where their loved one is, and that tears upon the mother or father, and so they say it's a relief to know that they're not paying in pain as something anymore.
Thank you. And with that, we'll close out tonight's forum. Thank you very much for staying with us this long. One last round of applause for our panelists for taking the time. Thank you very much.